The explorers drifted through the icy atmosphere of the remote planet. Their mission had been simple: to investigate a strange anomaly detected from orbit. No one expected what they would find buried beneath the frozen surface. Deep beneath the layers of ice and rock lay a colossal structure. Its shape like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. It was as if the planet had given birth to the ship and then forgotten about it. Its black metal gleamed under the soft glow of their scanners. As they hovered above the site, the ship's size was beyond comprehension, stretching across miles, as if it were an ancient titan long dormant but not forgotten. Commander Ilara stood at the forefront of the group, her breath steady despite the cold that pressed against her face. The others moved cautiously around her, a mix of excitement and uncertainty in their eyes, their boots crunching against the frozen ground beneath them. Their tech began to whir and buzz as they scanned the ship, its faint pulse of energy sending ripples through their instruments. The name was partially visible, worn down by time, but still legible: Erebus. The thought struck them all simultaneously. This was not just any derelict ship. This was a warship, an ancient warship that had somehow survived the eons untouched yet not entirely forgotten. The first wave of the team descended into the ship's entry point, a massive breach in the hull. The ship's exterior was seamless except for the scar, where something had struck it centuries ago. The inside was dark, cold, and silent. Their flashlights flickered over the walls, revealing symbols and markings of a civilization long gone, and a technology far beyond what they had seen in the modern age. It was clear the ship had not been built by any known species. Still, Ilara could not shake the feeling that this was not the first time this ship had been found. It seemed too perfect, too deliberate, as if it had been waiting to be uncovered. They moved deeper into the belly of the ship, and soon the air shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in temperature, but it was enough to send a shiver down their spines. The ship was waking up, not physically, but in a way that felt much more alive. The walls seemed to hum in response to their presence. Each step they took echoed through the massive halls, as if the ship were aware of their every move, and yet it remained silent. No alarms, no warnings, just the quiet hum of ancient systems coming back to life. The first anomaly appeared when one of the explorers, Dr. Soren, approached a control panel that seemed to pulse with energy. His fingers brushed over the surface, and the ship responded instantly. Lights flickered to life, casting an eerie glow across the ship's interior. The panel shifted and whirred as if waking from a long slumber. Then came the voice. It was not loud, but it was there, a soft voice, like static weaving through the air. Intruders detected. It said the words, cold and mechanical. Ilara's heart raced. The crew froze, unsure of what to make of this moment. Was this ship a tomb, or was it a weapon they had just unearthed? A warship from an ancient warship was a dangerous thing in itself. But what if it had not been abandoned? What if the ship had been waiting for something that had now arrived, and the explorers feared they had just triggered its awakening? The voice reverberated through the corridors of the Erebus, like a distant echo, at first subtle but growing louder with each passing second. The crew exchanged nervous glances as the words played over and over in their minds. Intruders detected. And then the cold silence returned. Only the hum of the ship's systems remained. The unease was palpable among the explorers, the weight of what they had just uncovered pressing down on them like a physical force. Commander Ilara took a breath and activated her comm device, her voice steady yet tinged with uncertainty. Team, secure your positions. I want a full scan of the ship's systems now. The exploration team spread out their steps, more careful now that the Erebus seemed to react to their presence. Every sound, every movement felt amplified in the cold emptiness of the ship. Their scanners lit up with unfamiliar readings. Some of them were harmless background noise from the ancient ship's dormant tech. Others were far more unusual, a pulse of energy from deep within the heart of the ship. Something was awakening, something more than just the lights and hums. Dr. Soren adjusted his scanner, his brow furrowed as he studied the readings. There was something strange in the data streams, something that didn't fit with any of their records. It seemed like the ship was somehow pulling energy from the planet's core, redirecting it to power systems that shouldn't even be capable of such things. This isn't possible, he muttered under his breath. This ship, it's been dead for thousands of years, but it's drawing power like it's still alive. Ilara moved to his side, scanning the data herself, her gut twisted with every new revelation. She had heard rumors of lost ships in the fringe sectors of the galaxy, but nothing like this, nothing that could possibly match the scope of what they had just unearthed. Erebus had been designed to be more than just a ship. It was something else, something far more complex and dangerous than she had anticipated. As they pushed deeper into the ship, the walls themselves seemed to shift and grow warmer. The air thinned slightly with each step they took toward the inner core of the vessel. The further they went, the more the ship seemed to come alive. Each control panel they passed lit up in response to their movements, glowing softly like the ship was tracking them. It became evident that this was not a relic that had simply been forgotten. This was a place that had been waiting for something to activate it. But what? It was then that they heard it again, the voice low and commanding. "You should not have come." It wasn't a simple message this time. It was a direct communication. The voice cut through the air like an icy blade. There was no mistaking its intent. It was a warning. But why now, and why them? Ilara's pulse quickened, but she refused to show any fear in front of her team. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice strong and clear. "What is this ship?" The reply came immediately. "I am the Keeper," the voice said. "I was tasked with ensuring that the ship would never be activated by outsiders, but you have done so, and now the consequences are inevitable." A chill ran down Ilara's spine. The air around them grew heavier as the realization set in. The Erebus was not merely a ship, it was a sentient being guarding something that the galaxy was not ready to understand. She looked around at her team, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Their mission had just become far more dangerous than they could have imagined, and they were no longer the ones in control. The air was thick with tension as the explorers stared at the darkened walls of the Erebus, its eerie hum growing louder and more insistent. The crew felt it now, a presence in the ship, like it was watching them, like it was listening to their every thought. Commander Ilara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The Keeper's words echoed in her mind. "The consequences are inevitable." What consequences was the ship warning them about, and why had it waited so long to reveal itself? Dr. Soren was still working on his scanner, trying to understand what was happening. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered again, as his fingers danced across the controls. "The ship's systems are shifting. We're triggering something massive." His voice wavered with a mix of awe and fear. "The power output is off the charts. Whatever it is, the Erebus is coming back online. And it's not just responding to us, it's actively targeting something." Ilara's stomach dropped. She turned to the other members of the team. "Targeting what?" she demanded. But the answer came before anyone could speak. The ship's voice filled the air once more, its tone colder now. "The fleet approaches," it said. "They are already aware of your actions." A sudden realization hit Ilara like a blow to the chest. The ship wasn't merely reacting to their presence, it had been prepared for it. The Erebus had been lying in wait for something specific to happen, and now it seemed to know that they were not the only ones drawn to it. The Alliance fleet would soon be arriving to claim the ship, or worse, to destroy it, to prevent its power from falling into the wrong hands. The first sign of the impending disaster came when the entire ship shook violently. A deep thrum reverberated through the walls, followed by a harsh metallic screech that filled the air. The lights flickered and alarms blared. The crew scrambled to secure themselves, and the ship seemed to respond as if it were alive. The control panels hummed to life as energy surged through the ship at an impossible rate. Ilara barely had time to react when the Erebus unleashed its first strike. A surge of raw energy ripped through the atmosphere with a force that knocked them all off their feet. The ship's hull seemed to shudder under the blast, but the shockwave was felt far beyond the confines of the ship's interior. Sensors aboard the nearby Star Alliance fleet picked up a sudden burst of electromagnetic interference. Their communications went dead, and their vessels were knocked off course. The Alliance fleet was not ready for this kind of assault. "Get us to the control room now," Ilara shouted as she scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. "We need to shut this down before it escalates." They moved quickly down the corridors, their steps urgent, the voice of the Keeper growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. "You are too late," it warned them. "The ship has awakened and will not allow itself to be stopped." The crew reached the control room just as another wave of energy shot out from the ship's core this time. It was aimed outward toward the fleet waiting in orbit above the planet. The energy beam struck a Star Alliance cruiser with the force of 1,000 meteors. The ship's hull buckled under the impact. Its systems failed as it lost power and began to drift uncontrollably. The explosion sent ripples of light across the sky, visible even from the surface of the planet. Ilara's mind raced. They had awoken the Erebus, but it seemed to have far more power than they had anticipated. And now it was clear that the ship would not stop until it had destroyed everything in its path. The voice of the Keeper continued its warning. "You are not the first to seek the ship's power," it said. "And you will not be the last, but you will be the first to perish." The tension in the room reached a breaking point as Ilara realized the truth. They were no longer in control of this mission. They had triggered something that was now far beyond their ability to stop. The explosion that had torn through the Star Alliance cruiser was only the beginning as the Erebus continued to pulse with an energy that seemed to grow stronger. With every passing second, the crew stood frozen in the control room, their hearts pounding as they watched the devastation unfold before them. The ship's eye, the Keeper, had warned them, but they had no way of understanding the full scope of the danger they had unleashed. Ilara gripped the console in front of her, her mind racing. She had to stop this. She had to find a way to control the Erebus before the next wave of destruction could be unleashed. But every time she tried to access the ship's systems, the controls slipped beyond her reach. The ship had locked down every function, except for one. The voice of the Keeper returned cold and emotionless. "You cannot control what you do not understand." Dr. Soren was already frantically typing into his console, trying to decode the ship's data stream. "This isn't just an AI," he muttered as the screens in front of him flickered. "This ship is connected to something bigger. It's not just reacting to us, it's following commands from somewhere else." Ilara's stomach churned at the implications. "Where are the commands coming from?" she demanded, her voice tight with anxiety. Soren hesitated. I think the ship itself is a weapon. Its design wasn't just for war. It was meant for something more, something terrifying. It's an ancient power source, like nothing we've ever seen before." As the words left his mouth, the entire ship seemed to groan, a low thrumming sound reverberating through the walls. The lights flickered again, this time more violently, and the floor beneath them trembled. Ilara turned toward the door and motioned for the team to move quickly. "We need to get to the core now. We have to understand what's driving this before it's too late." They moved swiftly down the endless corridors of the Erebus, the atmosphere growing heavier with each step. The air seemed to shift and crackle as they approached the heart of the ship. The temperature had begun to rise steadily. The walls were slick with condensation, and the once cold silence was now filled with a strange hum. It was as if the ship itself were alive and breathing. As they reached the central chamber, the enormous core of the Erebus loomed in front of them, an orb of swirling energy surrounded by complex machinery that no one in the crew could even begin to comprehend. "What is this?" Ilara whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. The core of the ship pulsed with an otherworldly light, as if it were a heart beating in rhythm with the ship itself. Dr. Soren stepped forward, his fingers trembling as he ran them over a panel near the core. The readings were overwhelming. This ship was designed to harvest energy not just from a star system, but from entire galaxies, he said in disbelief. "It's pulling power from multiple sources across the galaxy like a nexus." A new voice cut through the tension. "You have reached the truth." The Keeper's voice echoed around them, as though the ship itself were speaking from every direction. "This ship was not built to protect you or your species. It was designed to ensure the survival of something far greater, something that no longer exists." The core's pulsing light grew more intense, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, something that no longer exists?" she demanded. "The Erebus was built to defend against the Trivaru," the Keeper replied. "A race of conquerors that once ruled the galaxy. Their thirst for power and domination knew no bounds, but they were defeated before the war could end. Humanity's greatest creation, Erebus, was to be their final stand, a weapon to destroy the Trivaru once and for all." Ilara's mind raced. The Trivaru, they were believed to be extinct, but if what the Keeper said was true, they were far from gone. And the Erebus was not just a relic, it was a weapon of unimaginable power, built not to defend humanity, but to end it if the galaxy's enemies ever returned. Her voice shook as she spoke. The Trevaru. They're coming back, aren't they? The Keeper's silence answered her question, and in that moment Ilara realized the terrifying truth: the war that humanity had long forgotten was far from over. It had only just begun. The gravity of what Ilara and her team had just uncovered weighed heavily on them. As they stood before the pulsing core of the Erebus, the Keeper's words replaying in their minds, "The Trevaru are not gone, they are only waiting." Ilara's hands trembled as she held the console in front of her. The ship's systems were still active, its weaponry was fully powered and ready to unleash more devastation at any moment. The Erebus was not just a warship, it was a harbinger of an ancient war that had not yet ended. The team stared at each other, unsure of what to do next. The message was clear. The Erebus had been created to fight against a threat that still existed, and now the ship was fully awake and ready to wage that war again. But the galaxy had changed, it had moved on. Humanity was no longer the dominant force it had once been. "We need to get back to the surface," Ilara said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "We need to contact the Alliance and let them know what we found. They need to understand that the Trevaru are still a threat, and that the Erebus may be our only weapon against them." Dr. Soren looked up from his console, his face pale. "Do you think they'll believe us?" He asked quietly. "How can we convince them that the Trevaru are real, and that we're not just chasing ghosts?" Ilara's gaze hardened. "We have no choice but to try," she said. "The Erebus is a weapon of unimaginable power, and if the Trevaru are really out there, we need the Alliance to help us unlock it." But the road ahead was not so simple. As the crew made their way back to the surface, the sky above them darkened, and a familiar hum filled the air. The Erebus was still watching them, still waiting, and just as they reached the landing site, the first signs of trouble appeared. A flicker in the sky, followed by a series of distant explosions. The Erebus had sent another pulse of energy into the star system, and the Alliance fleet had begun to respond. Ilara's comm device buzzed with an incoming transmission, and her heart sank as the voice of Admiral Vance crackled through. "Ilara, this is Admiral Vance. We're picking up strange readings from your location. There's an energy surge unlike anything we've seen before. We need a full report." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. "Admiral, we've discovered something incredible. We found the Erebus, and the threat it was built to stop is real. The Trevaru are still out there, and they've been waiting for this moment." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Vance's voice returned. "I don't have time for speculative reports. Ilara, your findings don't align with anything we've been briefed on. We're not sending any reinforcements until you can give us something more concrete." Ilara's frustration grew, but she kept her voice steady. "Admiral, the Erebus is more than just a ship. It's a weapon designed to defend against the Trevaru. We're sitting on a powder keg right now, and the Alliance needs to act fast before the situation escalates." The comm went silent for a moment before Vance spoke again, his voice much colder now. "I'm sending a recon team to your position, Ilara. If you're wrong about this, it's your career at stake." Ilara knew that tone all too well. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. The Admiral had made up his mind, and if the Erebus truly held the power to reshape the galaxy, the Alliance's response would not be as simple as sending a recon team. They would come in full force with weapons and strategies designed to secure the ship at any cost. As she watched the recon team approach her location, Ilara's mind raced. The Erebus was no longer just a discovery, it had become the center of a political struggle. The Alliance was divided. Some factions believed the ship should be studied and used as leverage in future conflicts, while others feared it could bring about the galaxy's downfall. The first steps of war had already begun, and Ilara knew that no matter what happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. The tension between the factions within the Alliance had reached a boiling point by the time Ilara and her team met the recon squad sent by Admiral Vance. They had expected a small support unit to assist in securing the Erebus, but what arrived was a heavily armed force bristling with military hardware. Their weapons were drawn, their eyes cold, and calculating the coldness of the Alliance's response to their discoveries, was clear they weren't coming to assist, they were coming to control. Ilara's heart pounded as she made eye contact with their leader, Captain Reyes. His eyes narrowed as they locked onto her and her team. "Commander Ilara," he said, his tone harsh and professional. "We've been ordered to take control of the Erebus immediately and ensure no further actions are taken without explicit clearance from the Alliance High Command." Her stomach twisted with frustration, but she kept her composure. "Captain Reyes, the Erebus is not just a military asset, it's a relic of an ancient war. It holds the key to understanding the Trivaru's return. We can't just lock it down without understanding what we're dealing with." Reyes didn't flinch. "That's not our call to make," he replied firmly. "The higher-ups have already decided what's necessary. We're securing the area until further notice." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Ilara knew there was little time to argue. They had to make sure the Erebus wasn't locked away without being fully studied, and if there was any truth to the Keeper's warning, they needed to prepare the entire galaxy for the impending threat. Just as the tension reached its peak, an alarm blared across the comms network. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "What's that?" she demanded as the alarm echoed through the cold air of the ship's exterior. "Unknown fleet incoming," Captain Reyes said, as his fingers flew over his comm device. "We're picking up large energy signatures from a fleet just outside the system, and they're not broadcasting any friendly codes." Ilara's mind raced. She had hoped for more time to convince the Alliance that the Trivaru were a real threat, but now it seemed the Trivaru had found them first. The Erebus had been their beacon the moment it reactivated, and now the very thing they had feared was heading toward them. The recon team's eyes widened as the fleet of unknown ships materialized on their scanners. They were not human, nor were they any species the Alliance had encountered before. Their ships were massive, dark, hulking structures that seemed to absorb the light around them as if they were creatures of the void itself. And then the first communication came through loud and clear from the mysterious fleet. A voice filled with malice and ancient authority boomed through the comms. "This is the Trivaru Dominion. You have awakened what was never meant to be awakened. Prepare for annihilation." Ilara's blood ran cold as the voice resonated with a terrible power. She had heard of the Trivaru only in whispered legends, stories of a race that had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. Their technology was unmatched, and their thirst for conquest had nearly destroyed humanity before the Erebus was ever built to stop them. "Impossible," Soren gasped as he checked the scanners again. "It's them, the Trivaru. They've found us." "Prepare for impact," Captain Reyes barked. "All units, engage the enemy. Move out." But Ilara knew it was too late. The Trivaru had been waiting for the Erebus reawakening. They had known of its existence for centuries, and now they were here to reclaim what was theirs. Her heart sank as she realized that the Erebus wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon, yes, but also a beacon, a signal to those who had been waiting for it to rise again. The battle began almost immediately as the first of the Trivaru ships broke through the atmosphere, their weapons charged and ready to strike. But just as quickly as the enemy arrived, something else happened. The Erebus began to respond, its weapons powered up in unison, and the first energy pulse sent out from the ship struck the Trivaru fleet with incredible force. The Star Alliance ships that had arrived to defend the planet found themselves caught in the crossfire. They scrambled to avoid the pulse, but the sheer power of the Erebus's weapons was overwhelming. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outclassed by a force they hadn't even known existed until now. Ilara stood frozen as the chaos unfolded before her. A full-scale war had just erupted over the Erebus, and the Trivaru were not here to negotiate. They were here to reclaim what they had lost, and they would stop at nothing to destroy everything in their path. The Erebus was no longer a forgotten relic of an ancient war. It was a weapon of mass destruction in the hands of an enemy who had waited eons to reclaim it, and now the full scale of the war that had just begun was crashing down on the Alliance and the crew that had once believed they could control the ship. The sky above the planet lit up with explosions as the Trivaru fleet unleashed their full fury on the Erebus, and the ships of the Alliance that had foolishly arrived to defend it, the massive enemy ships, moved in formation like a deadly pack of predators surrounding their prey. The Erebus retaliated with deadly precision, its weaponry lighting up the darkened space, like a star-going supernova sending bolts of energy that disintegrated enemy ships in a single strike. Ilara watched in disbelief as the recon team scrambled to fire back against the Trivaru ships, but they were outmatched. The Trivaru's energy shields were far superior to anything the Alliance had ever encountered. Their vessels were like living war machines. They seemed to move and adapt with a terrifying speed, as though they were always one step ahead. "Commander," Soren shouted, his voice laced with panic, "the Erebus is broadcasting a signal. It's a countdown." A sense of dread washed over Ilara as she turned toward Soren, her mind racing. What kind of countdown? Soren's face was pale as he ran diagnostics on his terminal. It's counting down to an event. It's not just a weapon. There's a core destabilization process. If it reaches 0, it's going to wipe out everything in a massive radius. It's like a self-destruct sequence, but on a galactic scale. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Can we stop it? Soren looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know, Commander. If the ship's systems are fully activated, it could be impossible to shut it down before it's too late. The Erebus had always been designed as a weapon, but this new revelation was something far worse. The ship wasn't just a guardian against the Trivaru. It was an extinction-level device. If the countdown reached its end, the ship would detonate, consuming everything in its vicinity in an explosion of unimaginable proportions. We can't let that happen, Ilara said, her voice hard with resolve. We need to figure out a way to disable it before the countdown hits 0. Captain Riss, who had been monitoring the situation from a safe distance, turned to Ilara with an uncharacteristic sense of urgency in his eyes. Commander, we're facing the Trivaru and the Erebus at the same time. If we don't find a way to stop it, the entire sector will be obliterated. Ilara knew they were running out of time. The Trivaru ships were relentless, bombarding the Erebus's defenses with wave after wave of energy blasts, while the Alliance fleet scrambled to regroup and provide support. The two factions were united by a single truth. The Erebus was the key to survival. If the ship was destroyed, or worse, if its core went critical, nothing could stop the Trivaru from sweeping through the galaxy. Ilara turned to her team. We need to get back inside the ship and find the core's control center. If we can't deactivate the countdown from there, we'll have no choice but to risk trying to override the ship's systems manually. But as she spoke, the Erebus sent out another pulse of energy, stronger this time, and with a greater intensity. It struck a Trivaru cruiser head-on, vaporizing it in an instant. Yet the destruction was not limited to the Trivaru fleet. Ships in the Alliance formation were caught in the blast as well, their shields failing under the overwhelming force. They're fighting each other, but they're both going to lose, Soren whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Ilara looked at the battlefield, the chaos unfolding around them. The Trivaru were unyielding, and the Erebus was becoming increasingly unpredictable. The countdown was ticking faster now, its red numbers flashing with a cruel sense of inevitability. The galaxy was on the verge of annihilation, and there was only one chance left to stop it. We're running out of time, Ilara said, determination surging through her veins. Let's move. We've got one shot at this. As they made their way back to the heart of the Erebus, the ship seemed to grow colder, the hum of its power more ominous. It was as though the vessel itself was aware of their presence, resisting their every step. Every corner they turned, the ship felt more like an enemy than a tool, its walls seeming to shift and pulsate in the flickering lights. They were inside the lion's den now, and every moment brought them closer to a final confrontation. They had one chance to save not just their lives, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The corridors of the Erebus felt like a labyrinth, the walls narrowing and the air thickening with each passing step. Ilara and her team pressed forward toward the heart of the ship where the core's control center awaited them, The countdown's numbers flashed relentlessly on every screen and every panel, as if taunting them with the knowledge that their time was slipping away. "How much longer do we have?" Ilara demanded, her voice tense as she glanced over at Soren. Soren's face was pale as he checked his scanner. "Less than 10 minutes at this rate. We're not going to make it unless we disable the core's stabilizers first." The ship groaned again, a low, ominous sound that seemed to reverberate through their bones. It was as though the Erebus itself were alive and fighting back against their intrusion. "We don't have much time," Ilara said, her voice steady with resolve. "We move fast, and we don't stop until we're at the control center." They turned a corner, weapons drawn and nerves taut, and found themselves facing a massive reinforced door that seemed to pulse with the ship's energy. It was the control center, but as they approached it, the door sealed shut with a sudden, deafening clunk. A warning flash appeared on their console: "Access denied," and the voice of the keeper echoed through the ship again, cold and merciless. "You will not be allowed to destroy what has been set in motion. The Trevaru will claim the galaxy, and all must perish for their return." Ilara's eyes blazed with fury. "I'm not asking permission," she snapped as she moved to the door's panel, frantically working to bypass its security locks. A bright flash illuminated the hallway as a pulse of energy shot from the Erebus's core, shuddering through the ship's systems with terrifying force. "The countdown is accelerating," Soren shouted. "We have seconds left before." Suddenly, there was a sharp crackling noise, and the door began to slide open. Its mechanisms giving way to Ilara's persistence, they rushed through the threshold and found themselves in the heart of the ship where the core's control center was housed. It was a massive chamber, its walls lined with glowing conduits and alien technology that hummed with deadly power. At the center of the room stood a glowing orb, the core of the Erebus, its energy swirling like a storm trapped in a cage. "We're running out of time," Ilara said, her voice tight as she approached the control console, the countdown now ticking down faster than ever. Soren worked alongside her, trying to interface with the systems, but the interface was alien and complex, designed to thwart anyone who tried to tamper with the ship's systems. "I can't stop it. I don't know how to shut it down." Ilara's mind raced, and then it hit her. The Keeper wasn't just an artificial intelligence. It was the ship's guardian, bound to protect it at all costs. "Soren, we need to disable the Keeper," she said urgently. "It's not just a program. It's controlling the ship. If we can break its connection to the core, we can stop the countdown." Soren nodded, his fingers flying across the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's embedded deep into the system. If I can cut the connection to the Keeper's network, it might be enough to stop the core from destabilizing." The room seemed to grow darker as the countdown reached its final seconds, the flashing red lights seeming to mock their efforts. "Hurry, Soren," Ilara urged, her pulse pounding in her ears. Just as the countdown reached its last few seconds, Soren's hands flew over the console, and with a final desperate press of a button, the room was filled with a sudden silence. The countdown stopped, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Erebus ceased its relentless hum. The energy that had been threatening to tear the ship apart flickered out, and the core's violent pulse calmed to a mere glow. Ilara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We did it." But their relief was short-lived as the voice of the Keeper returned, colder than ever. "You have delayed the inevitable, Commander Ilara. The Trevaru are already here, and they will finish what you have started." Suddenly, the ship shook violently, and through the massive windows of the control center, Ilara could see the Trevaru ships closing in, their massive forms like shadows swallowing the stars one by one. "We've only bought ourselves time," Ilara said, her voice filled with a hard resolve. "We need to warn the galaxy and prepare for the final battle. The Trevaru aren't just coming for the Erebus. They are coming for everything." The Erebus had awakened, and with it, the war had returned in full force. The fate of the galaxy now rested on the shoulders of those who had dared to awaken its secrets. Ilara and her team had won a brief reprieve, but the real fight was only just beginning.